Jake Martinez had always been terrible at keeping secrets, especially from his best friend Ryan. They'd grown up together on Maple Street, shared everything from Pokemon cards to detention slips, and now at 25, they still met every Friday at Murphy's Pub for their weekly catch-up. But tonight was different. Tonight, Jake had news that would either cement their friendship forever or destroy it completely. "So," Ryan said, sliding a beer across the sticky wooden table, "you've been grinning like an idiot for 2 weeks straight. What gives? New job? Lottery ticket? Or—" His eyes narrowed with mock suspicion. "Is there finally a woman who can put up with your terrible taste in movies?" Jake's grin faltered slightly. His fingers drummed nervously against his beer bottle, condensation making them slip. "How do you tell your best friend that you're falling hard for someone? How do you explain that for the first time in years, you wake up actually excited about the day ahead? And how, God help him, how do you admit that the woman making you feel this way is someone Ryan knows intimately?" "Come on, man," Ryan pressed, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "You look like someone who's been hit by lightning. In a good way. Who is she?" Jake took a long pull of his beer, buying time. The pub was crowded tonight, full of the usual Friday night crowd, office workers decompressing, college students pre-gaming, couples on dates. The familiar sounds of clinking glasses, laughter, and the distant crack of pool balls should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like white noise against the thundering of his heart. "It's complicated," Jake finally said. "Everything's complicated with you. Remember when you thought that barista was flirting, but she was actually trying to tell you there was a bee in your hair?" Despite his nerves, Jake laughed. "Okay, fair point. But this is different." Ryan's expression shifted from teasing to concerned. "Different how?" "Jake, you're starting to freak me out. Just tell me. What's the worst that could happen?" The worst that could happen. Jake could think of several scenarios, none of them pleasant. Ryan punching him in the face. Ryan never speaking to him again. Ryan thinking he was some kind of predatory creep. The list went on. "Promise me you won't flip out," Jake said. "I make no such promises. Tell me who she is." Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The words were right there, but they felt too big, too dangerous. He thought about her laugh, warm and genuine, the way it crinkled the corners of her green eyes. He thought about their first real conversation 3 weeks ago, when he'd stopped by Ryan's house to return a borrowed toolkit and found her in the garden, dirt-streaked and beautiful in the afternoon sun. "Your mom," Ryan said suddenly, his voice flat. Jake's beer bottle slipped from his fingers, catching it just before it hit the table. "What? Your mom? That's who you're dating, isn't it?" "My mom." Ryan's voice was eerily calm, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. The blood drained from Jake's face. "How did you?" "She's been humming." "My mother, who hasn't hummed in years, has been wandering around the house humming love songs and checking her phone every 5 minutes. She bought new clothes last week, the first time she's shopped for herself since Dad died." "And you?" Ryan pointed an accusatory finger. "You've been weird for exactly the same amount of time. Plus, Mom mentioned that Jake stopped by way too many times in casual conversation." Jake felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Ryan, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain how my best friend decided to start dating my 43-year-old mother without mentioning it to me?" The hurt in Ryan's voice was worse than anger would have been. Jake had expected rage, accusations, maybe even a fist fight. He hadn't expected his friend to sound so betrayed. "It wasn't planned," Jake said quietly. "It just happened. Things don't just happen, man. You make choices. You chose to ask my mother out. You chose to keep it secret from me. I didn't ask her out first." Jake stopped himself. Throwing Catherine under the bus wouldn't help anything. She what? Jake sighed, running his hands through his dark hair. Look, can we go somewhere private? This isn't a conversation for a crowded bar. Ryan studied his face for a long moment, then stood abruptly. Fine. My place. Mom's at book club until 10. The drive to Ryan's house was silent except for the hum of Jake's old Honda and the occasional direction from Ryan. Jake's palms were sweating against the steering wheel as he navigated the familiar streets of their neighborhood. How many times had he made this same drive over the years? How many times had he sat in the Morrison driveway, honking for Ryan to come out so they could go to baseball practice or the movies or just drive around aimlessly? The Morrison house hadn't changed much in 2 decades. Still the same colonial blue with white shutters, still the same carefully maintained garden that Catherine tended with such pride. Jake's chest tightened as he remembered finding her there that first day, wearing old jeans and a faded college t-shirt, her red hair pulled back in a messy ponytail as she wrestled with a stubborn rosebush. She looked so frustrated, Jake had said, approaching with the toolkit. Need help? Catherine had looked up, her face flushed from exertion and embarrassment. Oh, Jake, I didn't hear you come up. I'm just trying to transplant this rose before it gets too hot, but the roots are being difficult. He'd set down the toolkit and knelt beside her without thinking. Here, let me try. Sometimes you have to be patient with the stubborn ones. Their hands had brushed as they worked together, and Jake had felt something shift in the air between them. She'd smelled like sunshine and jasmine, and when she'd smiled at him, really smiled, not just the polite acknowledgement she'd given him for years, he'd felt his world tilt on its axis. Jake. Ryan's voice brought him back to the present. They were parked in the driveway now, and Ryan was staring at him with an unreadable expression. How long? 3 weeks. Officially. Officially. Jake turned off the engine and faced his friend. We've been talking for 3 weeks. Actually dating for 2. And before that? This was the hard part. Before that, I don't know. Maybe I've been noticing her differently for months. Maybe years. But I never acted on it, never even really admitted it to myself until... Until when? Until she kissed me. Ryan's eyebrows shot up. She kissed you? After we fixed the rosebush. She said thank you, and then she just did it. It wasn't planned, Ryan. Neither of us expected it. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation settling between them. Finally, Ryan got out of the car, and Jake followed, his legs feeling unsteady. The house was quiet and dim, evening shadows stretching across the hardwood floors. Jake had spent countless hours here over the years, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, he was seeing it as the place where Catherine lived, where she made her morning coffee and read her books and probably thought about him when he wasn't there. Ryan led him to the living room and collapsed into his father's old leather chair. Jake took the couch, the same spot where he'd watched movies and played video games and complained about homework for most of his teenage years. Tell me everything, Ryan said. From the beginning. So Jake did. He told him about that day in the garden, about how they'd ended up talking for 2 hours about books and travel and dreams deferred. He told him about the phone calls that started innocently enough. Catherine asking if Jake could recommend a good mechanic, Jake calling to check if she'd found one she trusted. He told him about the coffee date that wasn't technically a date until suddenly it was, about the way Catherine had looked at him across the table at Rosemary's Cafe like she was seeing him for the first time. She kept apologizing, Jake said. She kept saying it was inappropriate, that she was too old, that people would think she was having some kind of midlife crisis. But Ryan, when I'm with her, I feel like the best version of myself. She makes me want to be better, to do something meaningful with my life. Ryan was quiet for a long time, his fingers steepled in front of his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Do you love her? The question hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd been thinking it for days now, the L word hovering at the edges of his consciousness like a bird afraid to land. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I do." "And she loves you?" "She hasn't said it. But I think, maybe. I hope." Ryan stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where it had all started. Jake could see his reflection in the glass, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "She's been alone for 3 years," Ryan said finally. "Since Dad died, she's just been existing, going through the motions. I've been worried about her, actually, wondering if she'd ever find a way to be happy again." Jake's heart clenched. He'd known Catherine had been widowed. Everyone in the neighborhood knew about the car accident that had taken Michael Morrison so suddenly. But he'd never really thought about what that meant for her, the loneliness and grief she must have carried. "I know this is weird for you," Jake said. "I know it's awkward and complicated and probably the last thing you wanted to hear. But Ryan, she deserves to be happy. And if I can make her happy..." "If..." Ryan turned from the window. "You said you've been dating for 2 weeks. Haven't you figured out if you make her happy yet?" Jake thought about Catherine's smile when she opened the door for their dates, the way she'd started leaving her reading glasses on the kitchen counter instead of hiding them away, how she'd begun wearing her hair down more often because he'd mentioned once that he liked it that way. "She hums now," Jake said, "while she's cooking, while she's working in the garden. She told me she'd forgotten she used to do that." Ryan's expression softened slightly. "She did use to hum. All the time when I was growing up. Dad used to say it was how he knew she was really happy, not just content, but actually happy." "I'm not trying to replace your father," Jake said quickly. "I could never." "I know." Ryan sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "But Jake, she's my mom. This is so weird I don't even know how to process it." "I know. Trust me, I know." "Do you think I haven't thought about how strange this is? Do you think I haven't lain awake wondering if I'm losing my mind? Are you sleeping with her?" The question was blunt, unexpected, and Jake felt heat rise to his cheeks. That's not really your business." "The hell it isn't. She's my mother, and you're my best friend. Everything about this is my business." Jake studied his friend's face, seeing the genuine concern beneath the anger. "We're taking things slow," he said carefully. She wanted to be sure about her feelings before things got too serious. "And are they serious?" Before Jake could answer, they heard a car door slam in the driveway. Catherine was home early from book club. "Shit," Ryan muttered. "Should I leave?" Jake asked, already starting to stand. "No. Stay. We need to figure this out." The front door opened, and Catherine's voice carried into the living room. "Ryan? Are you home? I saw Jake's car in the driveway." Her voice held a note of pleasant surprise that made Jake's chest warm. "In here, Mom," Ryan called back. Catherine appeared in the doorway, and Jake's breath caught the way it always did when he saw her. She was wearing a simple navy dress that brought out her eyes, her red hair falling in soft waves past her shoulders. She looked beautiful and happy and slightly confused to find both of them sitting there with such serious expressions. "Hi," she said, her eyes finding Jake's. The smile that spread across her face was soft and genuine, the same one that had been making his heart skip beats for weeks now. "Hey," Jake replied, wishing desperately that they were alone so he could kiss her hello the way he'd been wanting to for days. Catherine's gaze shifted between them, and her smile faltered. "Is everything okay? You both look like someone died." "Mom," Ryan said, his voice gentle. "Sit down." She remained standing, her purse clutched in her hands. "What's going on?" "I know," Ryan said simply. "About you and Jake." The color drained from Catherine's face, and Jake watched her composure crumble in real time. She sank onto the arm of the sofa, suddenly looking smaller and more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. "Ryan, she stuttered. "Mom, it's okay." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "No, it's not okay. I should have told you. We should have told you together. I was scared." "Scared of what?" Ryan asked, and Jake was surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "Scared you'd think I was being ridiculous. A middle-aged woman acting like a teenager with a crush. Scared you'd think I was betraying your father's memory. Scared you'd think Jake was just, I don't know, going through some phase or trying to work out mommy issues or something equally horrible." Jake stood and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. "Catherine, look at me." She turned, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm not going through a phase. I don't have mommy issues. I'm a grown man who's falling in love with an incredible woman who happens to be my best friend's mother. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, it's unconventional. But it's real." Ryan cleared his throat. "Jake's right, Mom. I can see it in both of your faces. You're different. Both of you. Happier." Catherine squeezed Jake's hand. "Are you really okay with this? Because if you're not—" "I'm not okay with it," Ryan interrupted. "I probably never will be completely okay with it. But I'm okay with you being happy. And I'm okay with Jake being happy. If you two can make each other happy, then I guess I'll have to learn to deal with the weirdness." Relief flooded through Jake so powerfully that he felt light-headed. He'd prepared himself for the worst, but he'd never really prepared himself for acceptance, however grudging. "There are going to be rules," Ryan continued, holding up a hand. "So many rules." "Rules?" Catherine asked, a hint of amusement creeping into her voice. "No public displays of affection when I'm around. No talking to me about your relationship problems, either of you. If you break up, I'm not picking sides or playing messenger. And Jake, if you hurt my mother, best friend or not, I will make your life a living hell." Jake nodded solemnly. "Understood. And Mom, if this doesn't work out, you don't get to mope around the house making the rest of us miserable. You're a grown woman who made a choice. Own it." Catherine's eyes flashed with something that looked like pride. "Deal." The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Less charged, more contemplative. Jake could hardly believe they'd gotten through the conversation without anyone storming out or throwing punches. "I have one question," Ryan said. "How did this even start? I mean, Jake, you've known my mom your entire life. She's been Ryan's mom since you were 5 years old. When did that change?" Jake looked at Catherine, asking permission with his eyes. She nodded slightly. "Remember when you broke your leg skiing last winter?" Jake said. "You were laid up for 6 weeks, and I was coming over to help with groceries and yard work." Ryan nodded. "One day your mom was struggling to get the Christmas decorations down from the attic. I helped her, and we ended up going through all the boxes, talking about the memories attached to different ornaments. She told me about the first Christmas after you were born, how your dad had insisted on getting the biggest tree on the lot even though you were too young to appreciate it." Catherine smiled at the memory. "He said he was getting it for me, but really he was more excited about Christmas that year than I was." "She cried," Jake continued. "Just for a minute, when she was holding this little wooden angel you'd made in kindergarten. And I realized she wasn't just Ryan's mom anymore. She was Catherine. A person with her own stories and sadness and dreams. A woman who'd been putting everyone else first for so long that she'd forgotten who she was." "I felt seen," Catherine said quietly. "For the first time in years, someone was looking at me and seeing me, not just what I could do for them or what role I played in their lives. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. And that was it? Love at first sight? Jake laughed. God, no. I spent the next 3 months convinced I was losing my mind. I kept finding excuses to come over here. I told myself I was just being a good friend, helping out. But every time I saw her, I felt. Felt what? Catherine asked softly. Jake turned to face her fully. Like I was home. Like all the restless energy I'd been carrying around for years finally had somewhere to go. Catherine's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were happy tears. Jake. Okay, Ryan said loudly, standing up. This is where I invoke rule number 1. No mushy stuff when I'm in the room. Despite the emotional intensity of the evening, all 3 of them laughed. I think I need a beer, Ryan said. Actually, I think we all need a beer. And maybe some ground rules for how this is going to work going forward. As he disappeared into the kitchen, Catherine turned to Jake. That went better than I expected, she said quietly. Were you worried? Terrified. I kept imagining him telling me I was embarrassing myself, or that you were just using me, or... She shrugged. A mother's fears aren't always rational. Jake lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. For what it's worth, I was terrified too. I thought he might never speak to me again. And would that have changed anything? If he'd reacted badly? The question hung in the air between them. Jake considered it seriously, thinking about what his friendship with Ryan meant to him, what Catherine meant to him, and whether he could have chosen between them. I don't know, he said honestly. I'd like to think I would have fought for us. But losing Ryan would have been. I know, Catherine said. That's part of why I was so scared to tell him. Not just because of my own relationship with him, but because I didn't want to put you in an impossible position. Ryan returned with 3 beers and a bag of chips. Okay, he said, settling back into his chair. Let's figure out the logistics. Are you 2 actually dating, or is this just a casual thing? Jake and Catherine exchanged glances. They'd been taking things slowly, carefully, but Jake knew, had known for days now, that this wasn't casual for him. Not even close. It's not casual, Catherine said. At least not for me. Definitely not casual, Jake agreed. Are you thinking long-term? Like marriage and all that? The question caught Jake off guard. Marriage. He hadn't let himself think that far ahead, but now that Ryan had said it, the idea didn't scare him the way he might have expected. Instead, it felt right, natural, even. Maybe, Jake said carefully. Eventually. If things keep going the way they're going. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, and Jake worried he'd overstepped. But then she smiled, soft and wondering. Really? She asked. Really? Is that? Would that be something you'd want? I never thought I'd want to get married again, Catherine said. After Michael died, I couldn't imagine loving someone else that much. But with you. She paused, seeming to search for the right words. With you, I feel like myself again. Not just a widow, not just a mother. Just me. Ryan made a face. Okay, seriously, you 2 are killing me with the romantic stuff. Can we please establish some boundaries here? Over the next hour, they worked out the practical details. Jake would continue coming over for their usual Friday hangouts, but now Catherine might join them sometimes instead of disappearing upstairs. Family dinners would include Jake, but as Catherine's boyfriend, not just Ryan's friend. They'd be discreet around Ryan's younger sister Emma when she came home from college for visits, at least until they figured out how to break the news to her. What about everyone else? Ryan asked. The neighbors, Mom's friends, your co-workers? Jake hadn't thought much about the wider implications. He'd been so focused on Ryan's reaction that he'd barely considered how others might respond to their relationship. "I suppose some people will have opinions," Catherine said. "Some of them won't be kind." "Let them talk," Jake said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "Anyone who has a problem with two consenting adults being happy together can mind their own business." Catherine smiled at him, and Jake felt that familiar flutter of warmth in his chest. He was still amazed that he could make her smile like that, still amazed that she'd chosen him. "There's something else we need to discuss," Catherine said, her expression growing serious. "The age difference." Jake tensed. They'd talked about this before, but never in front of Ryan. "It's 18 years, Catherine continued. "I'm 43. Jake is 25. That matters to some people." "Does it matter to you?" Ryan asked his mother. "Sometimes. When I think about the fact that I have gray hairs and he doesn't. When I realize he was in middle school when I was planning my wedding to his father. When I wonder if he'll want children someday and I'm not sure I can give him that." Jake reached for her hand again. "Catherine, we've talked about this. Age is just a number. As for kids—" He paused, realizing this was a conversation they'd been dancing around for days. "I care more about building a life with you than I do about hypothetical children. If we decide we want kids, there are options. If we decide we don't, that's okay too." "But you might change your mind," Catherine said. "In 5 years or 10, you might realize you want things I can't give you." "And you might realize you want things I can't give you," Jake countered. "That's true for any relationship, regardless of age. The question is whether we think what we have is worth the risk." Catherine studied his face for a long moment. "And do you think it's worth the risk?" "Every day," Jake said without hesitation. "Every single day." Ryan cleared his throat. "Okay, I'm calling a timeout on the deep emotional stuff. My brain can't handle any more tonight." They spent the rest of the evening in easier conversation, talking about work and weekend plans and the baseball season. It felt surreal to Jake, sitting in the Morrison living room with his best friend and his girlfriend, pretending this was normal. But gradually, the pretense faded, and it started to actually feel normal. Different, but normal. When Catherine excused herself to go to bed around 10:30, she paused behind Jake's chair and rested her hand briefly on his shoulder. The casual intimacy of the gesture, so natural and unthinking, seemed to surprise all three of them. "Good night," she said softly. "Good night," Jake replied, wishing he could follow her upstairs. After she was gone, Ryan turned to him with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "This is going to take some getting used to." "For all of us," Jake agreed. "Are you really sure about this?" "About her?" Jake considered the question seriously. Was he sure? Sure seemed like such a small word for the certainty that had been growing in his chest for weeks now. "I've never been sure about anything in my life the way I'm sure about her," Jake said finally. Ryan nodded slowly. "Then I guess we're doing this." "We're doing this." "God help us all," Ryan muttered, but he was smiling when he said it. Later, as Jake drove home through the quiet streets of their neighborhood, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. The secret was out, the worst was over, and somehow, miraculously, he hadn't lost his best friend. His phone buzzed with a text message as he pulled into his apartment complex. It was from Catherine. "Thank you for tonight. For being brave when I couldn't be. For loving me enough to risk everything." Jake stared at the message for a long time, his heart racing. She'd said it. Maybe not in person, maybe not in the traditional way, but she'd said it. She loved him. He typed back quickly, "I love you too. More than I ever thought possible." Her response came almost immediately. "Coffee tomorrow morning?" I want to hear all about your conversation with Ryan after I went to bed." "It's a date," Jake replied, grinning at his phone like a teenager. As he climbed the stairs to his apartment, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few short weeks. A month ago, he'd been drifting, going through the motions of work and social obligations without any real sense of purpose. Now he had Catherine, with her quick wit and gentle hands and the way she hummed while she made him breakfast. Now he had a future that looked bright and uncertain and absolutely worth fighting for. The next morning dawned clear and warm, and Jake found himself whistling as he got ready for his coffee date. He chose his clothes more carefully than usual. The blue button-down that Catherine had complimented, dark jeans, the cologne she'd once said she liked. Rosemary's Cafe was busy with the Saturday morning crowd, but Catherine had secured their usual table by the window. She looked up when he walked in, and her smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Hi," she said as he bent to kiss her cheek. "Hi yourself. You look beautiful." She was wearing a green sundress that matched her eyes, her hair pulled back in a loose bun with tendrils framing her face. She looked younger somehow, more relaxed, as if sharing their secret with Ryan had lifted a weight from her shoulders. "So," she said once Jake had gotten his coffee and settled across from her, "tell me everything." Jake recounted the previous evening's events, including Ryan's rules and his grudging acceptance of their relationship. Catherine listened with growing amazement. "He really said he was okay with it?" "He said he'd never be completely okay with it, but that he was okay with us being happy. I think that's the best we could have hoped for." Catherine reached across the table and took his hand. "I was so worried he'd hate me for this. That he'd think I was being selfish or inappropriate." "Are you being selfish?" Jake asked. She considered the question seriously. "Maybe a little. I've spent the last 20 years putting everyone else's needs first. My husband's career, Ryan's activities, Emma's college plans. For once in my life, I'm doing something just for me. Something that makes me happy. So yes, maybe I am being selfish. And I'm finding that I don't care." Jake lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Good. It's about time." They talked for hours, making plans for the future with the freedom that came from no longer having to hide. Jake wanted to take Catherine to his company's summer picnic. Catherine wanted Jake to meet her book club friends. They talked about weekend getaways and dinner parties and all the normal couple things they hadn't been able to discuss before. "There's something I want to ask you," Catherine said as they prepared to leave the cafe. "Ask away." "Would you like to stay over tonight? Actually stay over, not just fall asleep on the couch watching movies." Jake felt his pulse quicken. They'd been taking things slowly, building their relationship on conversation and emotional connection rather than rushing into physical intimacy. But Jake had been thinking about this moment for weeks, wondering when they'd both be ready to take that step. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure. I've been thinking about it for days, actually. I just wanted to wait until after we told Ryan. It felt wrong somehow, keeping secrets and sneaking around." Jake understood. The secrecy had been necessary, but it had also cast a shadow over their developing relationship. Now, with everything out in the open, they could move forward honestly. "In that case," Jake said, standing and offering her his arm, "I'd love to stay over tonight." Catherine's smile was radiant. "Good. I'll make dinner. Something special." They spent the afternoon together, running errands and grocery shopping like any normal couple. Jake marveled at how natural it felt, how right. Catherine fit into his life seamlessly, and he found himself imagining a future where this was their routine. Lazy Saturday afternoons, shared meals, the comfortable domesticity of people who knew and loved each other. That evening, Catherine cooked while Jake sat at the kitchen counter, watching her move around the familiar space with practiced ease. She'd made his favorite, chicken marsala with roasted vegetables and garlic bread. The kitchen filled with delicious smells and the sound of Catherine humming softly as she worked. "I love listening to you hum," Jake said. Catherine glanced up from the stove. "Ryan used to say it was how he knew I was really happy when he was little. Not just content, but truly happy." "And are you? Truly happy?" Catherine set down her wooden spoon and moved to stand between his knees, her hands coming to rest on his shoulders. "Happier than I've been in years. Happier than I thought I could be again." Jake pulled her closer, his arms circling her waist. "Good. Because I plan on keeping you this happy for a very long time." "How long?" Catherine asked, her voice soft. Jake thought about his conversation with Ryan the night before, about the question of marriage and long-term commitment. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but full of possibility. "Forever if you'll have me," Jake said. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Happy tears, Jake realized with relief. "That's a very long time." "Not nearly long enough," Jake replied and kissed her. The kiss started soft and gentle, but quickly deepened as weeks of careful restraint gave way to honest emotion. Catherine's hands tangled in his hair, and Jake lifted her onto the counter, not caring about proper dinner timing or social conventions. All that mattered was this moment, this woman, this overwhelming feeling of rightness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Catherine rested her forehead against his. "The chicken's going to burn," she whispered. "Let it burn," Jake replied and kissed her again. Later, much later, they sat on the back porch sharing a bottle of wine and watching fireflies dance in the garden. Catherine was curled against Jake's side, her head on his shoulder, and Jake thought he'd never been more content. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "None. You?" Jake considered the question seriously. A year ago, if someone had told him he'd be sitting here with Catherine Morrison, planning a future together, he'd have thought they were crazy. But now, with her warm weight against his side and the sound of her breathing mixing with the evening symphony of crickets and rustling leaves, he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. "Not a single one," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, telling Emma, facing the inevitable gossip, navigating the complexities of a relationship that defied conventional expectations. But tonight, they had this, the quiet joy of being together without secrets or shame, the promise of a future built on love and mutual respect. "Jake," Catherine said softly. "I love you." The words were simple, but they hit Jake with the force of a revelation. He'd been hoping to hear them, had said them himself the night before in a text message, but hearing them spoken aloud in Catherine's warm, certain voice made them real in a way that nothing else could. "I love you too," he replied, turning to look at her in the soft porch light. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone." Catherine smiled and reached up to touch his face. "What do you think our story will be? In 10 years, 20 years, when people ask how we met?" Jake grinned. "We'll tell them that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. That love doesn't always follow the rules or make logical sense. That sometimes, if you're very lucky, your best friend's mom turns out to be the love of your life." "And they'll think we're crazy," Catherine said, laughing. "Maybe. But we'll know better." "Yes," Catherine agreed, settling back against his shoulder. "We'll know better." As the night deepened around them, Jake felt a profound sense of gratitude for the strange series of events that had brought them to this moment. A broken rosebush, a moment of unexpected vulnerability, a kiss that changed everything. It wasn't a conventional love story, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise. There would be challenges, certainly. There always were when two people chose to build a life together. But Jake was confident they could face whatever came their way, as long as they faced it together. He thought about Ryan's words from the night before, "If you two can make each other happy, then I guess I'll have to learn to deal with the weirdness." It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but it was acceptance, and that was enough. 3 months later, Jake found himself standing in the Morrison kitchen again, but this time he wasn't a guest. His coffee mug sat next to Catherine's on the counter, his jacket hung on the hook by the back door, and his name was on the grocery list stuck to the refrigerator. Somewhere along the way, without any formal discussion or grand gestures, he'd simply become part of the household. "You're up early," Catherine said, padding into the kitchen in her robe, her hair tousled from sleep. "Couldn't sleep," Jake admitted, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she started the coffee maker. "Too excited." Today was the day they were telling Emma. Ryan's younger sister was coming home from college for Thanksgiving break, and they'd agreed it was time to bring her into the loop. Ryan had been surprisingly helpful in strategizing the conversation, though he'd made it clear he wasn't going to be the one to break the news. "She's going to freak out," Catherine said, leaning back against Jake's chest. "Maybe. But she loves you, and she wants you to be happy. That has to count for something." Catherine turned in his arms, studying his face. "You're different, you know. More confident. More settled." Jake considered this. She was right. Over the past few months, he'd felt himself changing in ways he couldn't entirely explain. The restless energy that had plagued him for years had quieted. He'd gotten a promotion at work, started taking better care of himself, even begun thinking seriously about going back to school for his master's degree. "You make me want to be better," he said simply. "You were already good," Catherine replied, reaching up to smooth his hair. "I just helped you see it." The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted them, and they stepped apart automatically, old habits dying hard. Emma appeared in the doorway a moment later, looking exactly like a younger version of her mother with the same red hair and green eyes, though hers were currently bleary with sleep and confusion. "Jake." Emma blinked at him, clearly trying to process why he was in her kitchen at 7 in the morning. "What are you doing here so early?" "Where's Ryan?" "Still asleep," Catherine said quickly. "Jake came over early to help me with Thanksgiving prep." It wasn't entirely a lie. Jake had been helping with the cooking, but Emma's expression suggested she wasn't entirely buying it either. Her gaze shifted between them, taking in the domesticity of the scene, the easy intimacy of their body language. "Okay," Emma said slowly. "Well, I'm going to grab some coffee and go back to bed for a few hours. Flying always wipes me out." After she disappeared back upstairs, Catherine turned to Jake with wide eyes. "Do you think she suspects?" "I think Emma's always been observant. But she's also tactful. She won't push until we're ready to tell her." They spent the morning cooking together, falling into the rhythm they'd developed over the months. Jake prepped vegetables while Catherine worked on the turkey, and they talked about everything and nothing. Work gossip, weekend plans, the book Catherine was reading for her club. It was wonderfully mundane, the kind of comfortable domesticity Jake had never thought he wanted but now couldn't imagine living without. Around noon, Emma reappeared, looking more awake and alert. She accepted Jake's presence without comment, chatting easily with both of them as she made herself breakfast. But Jake could feel her watching them, cataloging the small intimacies, the way Catherine automatically handed Jake ingredients before he asked for them, how he knew where everything was kept, the casual way they moved around each other in the kitchen. Ryan emerged from his room around 1, drawn by the smell of Catherine's famous stuffing. "Smells incredible in here," he said, kissing his mother's cheek before grabbing a beer from the fridge. You remember Jake, right?" "Of course I remember Jake," Emma said with exaggerated patience. "He's only been coming around since I was in diapers. Though he's certainly making himself at home these days." Jake caught Ryan's eye and saw his own nervousness reflected there. They'd planned to wait until after dinner to have the conversation, but Emma's pointed comment suggested they might not have that luxury. "Actually," Catherine said, her voice only slightly higher than usual, "there's something we wanted to talk to you about." Emma looked up from her scrambled eggs, eyebrows raised. "Oh." Catherine glanced at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. They'd practiced this conversation, but now that the moment was here, all their careful words seemed to have fled. "Jake and I," Catherine began, then stopped, taking a deep breath. "We've been seeing each other. Romantically." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's fork remained suspended halfway to her mouth, her eyes darting between her mother, Jake, and Ryan, who was suddenly very interested in peeling the label off his beer bottle. "Seeing each other," Emma repeated slowly. "Dating," Jake clarified. "We're dating." Emma set down her fork and leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "For how long?" "About 5 months," Catherine said. 5 months. Emma's voice was carefully neutral. "And you're just telling me now?" "We wanted to be sure," Catherine said. "About our feelings, about where this was going. We didn't want to upset the family dynamic unless we were serious about each other." "And are you serious about each other?" Jake and Catherine exchanged glances. They'd been having increasingly frequent conversations about the future, about marriage and combining households, and all the practical details of building a life together. Just last week, Jake had quietly started looking at engagement rings online. "Yes," Catherine said firmly. "Very serious." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she turned to Ryan. "And you're okay with this?" Ryan shrugged. "I wasn't at first. It's weird, and it's going to stay weird. But they're happy, and they're not hurting anyone, so, yeah, I'm okay with it." Emma nodded thoughtfully, then turned back to Catherine and Jake. "So this is why you've been humming again." Catherine smiled. "Among other things." "And Jake, this is why you've been weird for months. Ryan and I were starting to wonder if you were having some kind of quarter-life crisis." "Just a love crisis," Jake said, earning a small smile from Emma. "Okay," Emma said finally. "I have questions. Lots of questions. But first," she stood and moved to hug Catherine. "I'm glad you're happy, Mom. Really glad. You deserve this." Relief flooded through Catherine's face as she hugged her daughter back. "Thank you, sweetheart." Emma then turned to Jake, and for a moment he wasn't sure what to expect. But then she was hugging him too, fierce and quick. "Don't hurt her," she said quietly in his ear. "She's been through enough." "I won't," Jake promised. "I love her too much to ever hurt her." Emma pulled back and studied his face, then nodded as if satisfied by what she saw there. "Good. Now, I want details. How did this happen? When did you realize you had feelings for each other? Have you met each other's friends? What do the neighbors think?" Over the next hour, they answered Emma's questions as honestly as they could. She was surprisingly mature about the whole thing, asking thoughtful questions about the practicalities and challenges rather than getting hung up on the unconventional nature of their relationship. "What about kids?" Emma asked eventually. "Do you want children together?" It was a question they discussed many times, usually late at night when they were both feeling vulnerable and honest. "We've talked about it," Catherine said carefully. "It's not off the table, but it's not a priority either. We're focused on building our relationship first." "I want whatever Catherine wants," Jake added. "If that includes children, then I'd be thrilled. If not, I'm completely happy with just her." Emma smiled at this. "That's very romantic, Jake. Also very diplomatic." "I try," Jake said with a grin. As the afternoon wore on, the initial awkwardness faded, and it began to feel natural having Emma know their secret. She teased them gently about their obvious affection for each other, made jokes about Jake finally becoming an official member of the family, and generally handled the revelation with more grace than Jake had dared hope for. "There is one thing," Emma said as they were cleaning up after dinner. "What are you going to do about Christmas?" Jake and Catherine looked at each other blankly. They'd been so focused on getting through the immediate hurdle of telling Emma that they hadn't thought much about the holidays. "What do you mean?" Catherine asked. "I mean, are you going to spend Christmas morning together? Are you exchanging gifts? What do we tell the extended family when they ask why Jake is suddenly at all our family events?" These were all good questions, and Jake realized they had a lot of practical details to work out. Their relationship had been developing in a bubble of privacy, but now that it was becoming public, they'd have to navigate all the social complexities that came with being a couple. "We'll figure it out," Catherine said. "One holiday at a time." "Good plan," Emma agreed. "Just, maybe warn me before you tell Grandma Morrison. I want to be there for that conversation." They all laughed, imagining the reaction of Catherine's formidable mother-in-law to the news that her daughter-in-law was dating someone younger than her eldest grandchild. That evening, after Emma and Ryan had gone to bed, Jake and Catherine sat together on the porch swing that had become their favorite spot for late-night conversations. "That went well," Catherine said, curled up against Jake's side. "Better than I expected. Emma's incredible." "She gets that from her father," Catherine said softly. "He always had this way of seeing the best in people, of finding the positive in any situation." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about Michael Morrison. He'd known the man peripherally. He'd been Ryan's dad, a fixture at baseball games and school events, someone who'd always been kind to Jake but whom Jake had never really known personally. "Do you think he'd approve?" Jake asked. "Of us, I mean." Catherine considered the question seriously. "I think he'd want me to be happy. He made me promise, near the end, that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life alone. He said life was too short and too precious to waste on grief." "And are you happy?" Catherine tilted her head to look at him. "Incredibly happy. Sometimes I feel guilty about how happy I am." "Why guilty?" "Because it feels too good to be true. Because I keep waiting for something to go wrong. Because I'm 43 years old and I feel like a teenager with her first crush." Jake pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Maybe feeling like a teenager isn't such a bad thing. Maybe it means you're remembering how to dream again." "Is that what this is? A dream?" "If it is, I never want to wake up." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the clear November sky. Jake thought about how much his life had changed since that day in the garden, how one unexpected moment had led to this: contentment, love, a future full of possibility. "Jake," Catherine said softly. "I have something to tell you." Something in her tone made Jake straighten slightly. "What is it?" Catherine turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "I've been thinking about what Emma asked earlier. About children." Jake's heart began to race. They'd talked about this before, but always in hypothetical terms. Catherine's tone suggested this conversation was going to be different. "And?" he prompted gently. "And I think I might want to try to have another baby. With you." Jake felt the world shift around him. "Really? I know I'm not young anymore," Catherine rushed to explain. "I know there would be risks and complications, and it might not even be possible. But when I imagine our future together, I keep seeing a little dark-haired baby with your eyes and your smile." Jake cupped her face in his hands, his own eyes filling with tears. "Catherine, are you sure? I meant what I said earlier. I don't need children to be happy with you." "I know. That's part of why I want this. Because you don't need it from me, but you'd love it if it happened. Because you'd be an incredible father. Because I want to create something beautiful with you." Jake kissed her then, pouring all of his love and gratitude and overwhelming joy into the contact. When they broke apart, both of them were crying. "So we're really doing this?" Jake asked. "Building a life together? Marriage, maybe babies, the whole thing." If you want it. I want it all, Jake said without hesitation. Everything. With you. Catherine smiled through her tears. Then I guess we'd better start planning. They talked until nearly midnight, mapping out their future with the giddy excitement of people who had found something worth building toward. They talked about engagement rings and wedding venues and whether they'd live in Catherine's house or find a new place together. They talked about cribs and college funds and how Ryan and Emma would feel about becoming big siblings to a much younger brother or sister. There's one more thing, Jake said as they were finally getting ready to go inside. What's that? Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, his heart hammering as he dropped to one knee on the porch where they'd spent so many evenings talking about their dreams. Catherine Morrison, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Will you marry me? Catherine gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Jake, you don't have to. I want to, Jake interrupted. I've wanted to for months. I love you, Catherine. I love your laugh and your kindness and the way you hum when you're happy. I love how you make me want to be better, how you see the best in everyone, how you've taught me that love doesn't always come in the package you expect. I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me. So, will you? Catherine was crying openly now, but she was also smiling the brightest smile Jake had ever seen. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course, yes. Jake slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood to kiss her as she admired the simple solitaire he'd chosen. It's perfect, Catherine said, holding her hand up to catch the porch light. How long have you been planning this? Weeks. I bought the ring the day after we told Ryan. I've been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment. And tonight felt right? Jake looked around at the porch where they'd shared so many quiet conversations, where they'd first told each other they loved each other, where they'd just planned their entire future together. Tonight felt perfect, he said. As they finally went inside, Catherine's engagement ring catching the light and her humming filling the quiet house, Jake marveled once again at the unexpected turns life could take. 6 months ago, he'd been drifting, going through the motions without any real sense of purpose or direction. Now he was engaged to the woman he loved, planning a wedding and possibly a family, building something beautiful and lasting. It wasn't the story he'd thought he wanted, but it was better than anything he could have imagined. And as Catherine turned off the porch light and took his hand to lead him upstairs, Jake knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning of their greatest adventure yet.